Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new PowerPoint, The End of Feudalism. Before I get to the PowerPoint, I just want to show you the notes you should be working on right here. MA3, Shifting Economy and End of Feudalism in the Middle Ages. So this PowerPoint right here should take, 25, 30 minutes. We'll work our way through it today and make sure that we get all of our bases covered. So we're looking at how feudalism, that political, social, and economic system you just learned about, all came to an end. Okay, so just to start us off here, we're going to start with a review on the three-field rotation system. So it was talked about a little bit in feudalism as being a way for the peasants and serfs to be able to better supply food to the village, but it also is seen as somewhat of a demise for feudalism. Once people realize that this system works to grow more food, they can start trading that food. You don't have to give it anymore to the knights or the nobles. You can now take it and make money off of it and make your own living. It's kind of the beginning of capitalist ideas. All right, so we're going to get started. The first problem is growing food supply. And again, just to go back to it, we're going to go through the notes, and then you're going to take time to pause the video and answer these questions. Okay? All right, so growing food supply. And like I mentioned, the three-field rotation started to put more land into better production. And also during this time, there was also just a mild, like, global warming stretch that occurred. It heated up the planet, and when that happens, more things tend to grow, especially when it came as it did with here in the Middle Ages, where it was kind of a wet, warm climate. So it allowed empires to expand and allowed farmers to grow more food. And when they really started to work with this three-field rotation idea, they started to realize how much more beneficial, or how much more financially beneficial that farming was. And also, horses and oxen speed up farm chores. So no longer are they just pulling this by hand or working this. They started using farm animals to really speed it up. So the food supply multiplied drastically. Right, so this is going to help you fill out that section in your notes. I'll read it to you here in the PowerPoint. A growing food supply. Europe's great revival would have been impossible without better ways of farming. Expanding civilization requires an increased food supply. Farming was helped by a warmer climate that lasted from about 800 to 1200 AD. Farmers began to cultivate lands in regions once too cold to grow crops. They also developed new methods to take advantage of more available land. Using horsepower. For hundreds of years, peasants depended on oxen to pull their plows. Oxen lived on the porous straw and stubble. They were easy to keep, but they moved very slowly. Horses needed better food, but a team of horses could plow twice as much land in a day as a team of oxen. Before they could use horses, however, people needed a new type of harness. Harnesses of the early Middle Ages went around the horse's neck. They nearly strangled the animal when it pulled. Sometime before 900, farmers in Europe began using a new technology. This was a harness that fitted across the horse's chest, taking pressure off its neck and windpipe. As a result, horses gradually replaced oxen for plowing and pulling wagons. Three-field system. At the same time, villagers began to organize their land differently. Under the old two-field system, peasants divided the village's land into two great fields. They planted one field with crops and left the other to lie fallow, or unplanted to avoid exhausting the soil, for a year. So if a village had 600 acres, each year farmers used 300 acres for raising food, leaving the other 300 acres fallow. Around 800, some villages began to organize their land into three fields. With the same 600 acres, they used 200 for a winter crop of wheat or rye. In the spring, they planted 200 acres of oats, barley, peas, or beans. The remaining 200 acres lay fallow. Under this new three-field system, farmers could grow crops on two-thirds of their land each year, not just on half of it. As a result, food production increased. Villagers had more to eat. The food was also better for them because peas, beans, and lentils are good sources of vegetable protein. The result was an increase in population. People could raise larger families. Well-fed people could better resist disease and live longer. With horses, a farmer plowed more land in a day. This meant that teams cleared forests for new fields all over Europe. Axes rang as the great forests began to fall. All right, so go ahead and pause and take time to fill in your note packet there on how the growing food supply led to the end of feudalism. We're now going to move on to trade routes. Now, I do not believe it's in the PowerPoint linked here, but if you look at your notes, I recommend watching this video, and it should be in the instruction sheet too. So check this video out. It's going to really help you with some of the information. You're going to see how trade really expanded from Europe into Asia, into the Middle East, kind of bringing a bunch of cultures and goods together. All right, so trade routes. And here is that Silk Road. You see, to India. That's where a lot of the silk came from, in China, right here. So there was a whole lot of these routes merchants traveled on, with some big cities along the way. It really started to help establish these big towns that we think about in Europe today. So trade. People with the money that came in with this new farming technology wanted to start spending it on things that couldn't just be made at the manor. So the result was that they had to trade for it. And so trade routes could be found where? If you look at that last slide, it can be found pretty much going anywhere. Like I said, India and China. The video from the Silk Road is going to kind of help you out. So Asia, Africa, Europe, the Middle East, the Mediterranean, all over the Eastern Hemisphere was really available to trade on for these kings and these nobles with this newfound money that they had. Soon, it goes from luxury items like silks and spices to things we need like tools, and some simple foods start to get traded, and it starts to open up trade for more than just people that are rich. It opens it up for everybody in society. If you have something of value, you can trade it to make some money. So trade transforms the way people in the system view society. There's people at the bottom, the peasants and the serfs, that their sole job was to work and till the land and make sure that the land brought in food for the people that lived on the manor. And now, especially with the three field system, they can take half that food, probably not half, but they can take a portion of that food and they can go sell it. And they can make money that way. Trade and finance expand. Just as agriculture was expanding, so were trade and finance. This was in part in response to population growth. By the 1000s AD, artisans and craftsmen were manufacturing goods by hand for local and long-distance trade. Trade routes spread across Europe from Flanders to Italy. Italian merchant ships traveled to the Mediterranean to ports in Byzantium, such as Constantinople. They also traveled to Muslim ports along the North African coast. Trade routes were opened to Asia, in part by the Crusades. Fairs and trade. Most trade took place in towns. Peasants from nearby manors traveled to town on fair days, hauling items to trade. Cloth was among the most common trade items. Other items included bacon, salt, honey, cheese, wine, leather, dyes, knives, and ropes. Such local fairs met all the needs of daily life for the small community. No longer was everything produced in a self-sufficient manner. The guilds, great fairs, were made possible by guilds, which controlled the crafts and trade. A guild was an association of people who worked at the same occupation. It was similar to a union today. In medieval towns, guilds controlled all wages and prices in their craft. Each guild usually met in its own guild hall. The first guilds were formed by merchants who controlled all the trade in their town. As towns grew, skilled artisans, such as wheelwrights, glassmakers, winemakers, tailors, and druggists, began to craft guilds. Guilds enforced standards of quality. Bakers, for example, were required to sell loaves of bread of a standard size and weight and at a fair price. Only masters of the trade could be guild members. Becoming a master wasn't easy. First, a child was apprenticed to live to 9 years to a master to learn the trade. Then the apprentice became a journeyman and could go to work for wages. As the final step, a journeyman made an item, whether it was a shoe, a barrel, or a sword, that qualified as a masterpiece. Journeymen whose product met guild standards were welcomed into guild as masters. A financial revolution. This medieval world of fairs and guilds created a need for large amounts of cash. Before a merchant could make a profit selling his goods at a fair, he first had to purchase goods from distant places. Usually, this meant he had to borrow money, but the church forbade Christians from lending money at interest, a sin called usury. Where, then, do merchants go for a loan? Many of Europe's Jews lived in the growing towns and were money lenders. Money lending was one of the few ways of making a living allowed them. In this largely Christian world, Jews were kept on the fringes of society. Guilds excluded them. They had to live in segregated parts of town called ghettos. Because were forbidden to hold land, they had never become part of the feudal system. Over time, the church relaxed its rule of usury. Banking became an important business, especially in Italy. All right, so take time again to pause and fill in those two spots in your notes. When you're done, we can move on. So, the growth of towns. Towns began to form as a result of increase in trade, increases in food production. Why? So, take some time here. Again, if I go back to the notes, I know they're blank here and it's probably hard to type in that, but if you just here delete the lines, we should be good to go. But how can things like food production lead to an increase in towns? Think about what we talked about with what was going on in towns. And then also, how does trade lead to the increase in towns? If you need a reference, go back and look at the trade route sheet, and you can see where all these bigger towns are in Europe. It tends to be on the intersection of trade routes. Why is that? And also, towns held a lot of fairs, a lot of items that brought people in. So again, how does that contribute to the growth of towns? Trade and towns grow together. By the later Middle Ages, trade was the very lifeblood of new towns, which sprang up at ports, at crossroads, and hilltops, and along rivers. All over Europe, as trade grew, towns swelled with people. The excitement and bustle of towns drew many people. They were no longer content with their old feudal existence. Even though they were legally bound to their lord's manor, many serfs ran away. As people left life on the manor for life in towns, they challenged the traditional ways of feudal society, in which everyone had his place. They did not return to the manor, and towns grew rapidly. Most medieval towns developed haphazardly. Streets were narrow, filled with horses, pigs, oxen, and their refuse. With no sewers, most people dumped household waste, both animal and human, into the street in front of the house. It's pretty gross. Most people never bathed, and their houses lacked fresh air, light, and clean water, because houses were built of wood with thatched roofs. They were a constant fire hazard. All in all, there were many drawbacks to living in a medieval town. Nonetheless, many people chose to move to such towns to pursue the economic and social opportunities they offered. Towns and social order. So many serfs had left the manors by the 1100s that, according to a custom, a serf could now become free by living within a town for a year and a day. As the saying went, town air makes you free. Many of these runaway serfs, now free people, made better lives for themselves in towns. The merchants and craftsmen of medieval towns did not fit in traditional medieval social order of the noble, clergy, and peasant. At first, towns came under the authority of feudal lords, who used their authority to levy fees, taxes, and rents. As trade expanded, the burghers, or town dwellers, resented this interference in their trade and commerce. They organized themselves and demanded privileges. These included freedom of certain kinds of tolls or the right to govern the town. At times, they fought against their landlords and won these rights by force. Again, make sure you're taking time here to pause. There's going to be a handout that's included as well. That's going to talk even in more detail, and it's going to help you fill out these questions here in this packet. So take time to pause this video and go back to the instruction sheet, or you can click right here for the link. There's a reading there and a recording for you to fill in the notes. And when you're done, you're going to come back to this note packet and talk about how does this lead to the end of feudalism. And then our next topic here is the Crusades. We're going to start with this map here, the First Crusades. So we have the Roman Catholic Church really starting to battle the Islamic religion, and it has to go with the pursuit of the Holy Land. So, land that's important to both Muslims and Christians. And here's another map of some more crusades here. They went on for several years, and there was a total of 8 documented and 9 crusades to be said. So you have the Seljuk Turks, or these were the Muslim landowners in the Muslim empire, and then you had the Holy Roman Empire. And again, this is the Middle Ages. This is the battle for the Holy Land. Kingdom of the Crusades, it was called, right along this coast. They're still fighting there today. But we'll save that for World Affairs when you're juniors. So the Crusades. In 1093, Alexius Comnenus, the Byzantine emperor, there's these constant back and forth, again, between the Muslim Turks and the Christians. So we ask for help. And again, the big problem is that there's a threat to a really, really important major both political and religious town in Europe, and that's Constantinople. I think for a little bit there, the Pope lived in Constantinople when there was 2 popes, which we'll get to the next unit. So Pope Urban II forms the Crusades. Again, the goal here is to gain Holy Land and take back Jerusalem. So Jerusalem had fallen under Muslim rule, and they thought it was really, really important to make sure that Jerusalem, the home of Jesus Christ, the Savior, remained Christian, or went back to Christian, I should say. And so they viewed themselves as warriors that needed to protect the Christians against the Muslim armies, against the turning to Muslim. So it really became a clash of ideas. And I want to make sure that you guys know that the Crusades weren't just religious, they were also political. There's massive trade routes that went through Jerusalem. There is a stronghold there of resources, and also, again, just taking back the Holy Land, gaining more of an empire. That's a political move as well. So reasons to join the Crusades. I'm going to skip ahead a slide and read that for you. Now we're going to come up back to these points so you can fill in your notes. The causes of the crusading spirit. The Crusades have both economic goals and religious motives. Pope Urban's call brought a tremendous outpouring of religious feeling and support for the crusade. This support came from great lords and humble peasants alike. In 1096, between 50,000 and 60,000 knights became crusaders, with red crosses sewn on tunics worn over their armor and the battle cry of "God wills it" on their lips. The crusaders marched eastward. Few would return from the journey. Kings and the church saw the Crusades as an opportunity to get rid of the quarrelsome knights who fought each other. Again, think about this being political. They're just getting the knights out of Europe. It's enough of this battling. Go fight somewhere else. These knights threatened the peace of the kingdom as well as church property. Others who participated were younger sons who, unlike their oldest brother, did not stand to inherit their father's property. They were looking for land and position in society. Knights and commoners alike were fired by religious zeal. According to Pope Urban II, if the knights died on crusade, they were assured a place in heaven. In later crusades, merchants profited by making cash loans to finance the crusade. They also leased their ships for a heavy fee to transport armies over the Mediterranean Sea. In addition, the merchants of Pisa, Genoa, and Venice hoped to win control of key trade routes in India, Southeast Asia, China from Muslim traders. So what was really going on? They had political and economic motives. So they wanted to get rid of these constant bickerings between the knights in Europe. How could that cause a problem in Europe? Think about the people that followed the knights and think about these people in general. How would this cause issues in Europe? So younger sons also, they couldn't inherit property, so they wanted to go over and fight, because if you fight, you get land and position in society. There's an economic motive there. You're kind of freeing yourself, making yourself a living. And then religious zeal, wealth, adventure. Some just wanted to fight, and really some believed this was evil. But I believe in A and B. There's a lot of motive behind A and B. All right, so go ahead and pause the video, fill in your notes. And I'll just continue here. Maybe you want to pause after this. While the Crusades are religious, they're also political. So you have governments fighting each other, getting rid of the knights. Some different Islamic groups also fought each other. So both areas were having issues politically and internally. So maybe this was a way to get an outlet of it, maybe take some land as well. Europeans had reason to fear Muslim invasion. Muslim governments had taken Jerusalem, the Middle East, North Africa, and Spain were all part of the Roman Empire at one point, and they were now occupied mostly by these Muslim invaders, at least as the Christians saw it. So in all, there were 7 to 9 major crusades with smaller ones. These went on for a long time. People, a couple generations of their whole life through the crusades. So it's long-term stuff. It does have a kind of a modern day impact actually in the Middle East, which again we'll save for world affairs. And then the last reason, folks, we're going to talk about the Black Death, which there's a video that's also linked in the instructions in your note packet. I would check out before you take these notes. So here you see a picture of a flea and a rat. And maybe in 8th grade or middle school you watched it, but Fleas on Rats on YouTube. You can go ahead and watch it yourself. It's quite annoying, but it's also kind of funny. But it helps get the point of what happened at the Black Death across. So, where did the Black Death come from? No one really knows for sure, but they know how it was carried by fleas on rats. All right, so it started, if you look down here in the south, if you look at the key of the map, 1347, and it crept its way northward. And take note of the years. How long did it take? Excuse me, crept its way, crept its way northward. All right, how long does it take to go north? What does this tell you about a virus? Hint, hint, they spread. So the Black Death. So one thing that all this constant interaction from trading brought on these trade routes was the contact to people. And contact to people, disease spreads. Case in point, why we wear masks. Disease spreads. Rapid spread of disease over great distances. So found in bacteria, which were spread by the rodents. Many believe this actually started in Asia, so spread through the Silk Road, worked its way in the Mediterranean. The boats traveled north from Africa to Europe, and the story goes that it just kept spreading and spreading and spreading. And it causes a massive amount of turmoil in Europe, as we'll see. So what was this actually like? It was painful, and medicine was nowhere near what it is today. They had no way to cure or stop this thing. So a lot of people die. And the population took 400 years to recover, which is a very long period of time. They predict that 1/4 to half of the people in Europe dead, 25 million. So the problem with the Black Death is it caused absolute chaos. People not contacting each other, family members, friends, everyone was dying. People were worried. They were looking to God for answers. Why won't you answer our prayers? What's going on? It's just a time of extreme chaos, extreme disease, there's death, there's pain. This is a really chaotic thing. So what were the symptoms of the plague? There's some pretty gross stuff. So we'll start with day 1. You get this big swelling called a bubo in your armpit. It was like the size of an egg. Some people the size of an apple. It was really kind of disgusting. It just kind of swelled up. Day 2, you get really hot. You get really ill, sick, you throw up. And then day 3, people would start bleeding internally right under the skin, and they get these patches. Day 4, it goes to your nerves, and there's a lot of pain, spasms. And then day 5, and this is the grossest one, the buboes would burst, and a foul-smelling black liquid would ooze from the open boils. When this happened, you would probably live. Sometimes it didn't happen, and you'd suffer a painful death. Again, really gross. Just your body is almost like poison and tries to get rid of it. It's a pretty gross thing, like I said. So what causes the plague? Who or what causes the plague? It's a flea. The oriental rat flea, to be specific. How was it transmitted? So we now know that the most common form of the Black Plague, Black Death, was the bubonic plague. Excuse me. This disease was spread by the fleas, which lived on the rats. The rats sucked the rats' blood. The fleas sucked the rats' blood, which contained the plague germs. When the rat died, the fleas jumped on humans and passed a deadly disease. So it has to kind of do with our cleanliness, and it does still somewhat exist today. You can see an example of it here. It's nowhere near as common, but there are some breakouts of it every now and then. So here's a graphic that shows you again how the disease spreads. What were some of the cures? There's a lot of attempts, but not a lot of successful ones because medicine hasn't really come that far. It was pretty primal compared to what we have today. So if the swelling burst and the poison came out, some people survived. It seemed sensible to draw out the poison. So there's a lot of lesions on these buboes that would drain them. This foul-smelling black liquid. There's people that popped them. There's people that use leeches. There's a whole lot of different ways to go about this. But we're going to look at a few. The swelling should be softened with figs and cooked onions. The onions should be mixed with yeast and butter. Then open the swellings with a knife. No idea how this came up. No idea how someone thought of this. That's really gross. Okay, number 2, take a live frog and put its belly on the plague sore. The frog will swell up and burst. Keep doing this with further frogs until they stop bursting. Some people say that a dried toad would do better. I'll let you guys form your own mental image about how this worked. Question. How useful do you think these medieval cures actually were? Did they help at all, or were they more harmful? I'll let you be the judge on that one. Images from that period, that the art that came out of this, it's pretty famous stuff. It also does a good job of kind of painting the mood back then. How they use skeletons, kind of pulling people into the afterlife. Same thing here, how the skeleton seems to be taking the person away and the family can't do anything. This is how people felt. It was a really trying time. Dancing on a grave like it's a party in the afterlife. So how did this really lead to the end of feudalism? This is going to be the last, most probably useful part of the Black Plague notes, is that before the plague, here's all the workers. I think we went over this in feudalism too. You have a lot of workers, there's a lot of need, things work out well. When you have no workers and a lot of need, the workers can start to negotiate for wages. That becomes kind of the big thing, is they don't have to just go work for next to nothing. They can talk to Bob, Frank, Jim, and Joe and really negotiate how they can make the most amount of money. And play these farmers off of each other. It's a really kind of the advent of capitalism. All right, so we are through this note packet. So make sure you've watched the videos. Go back to any parts you may have missed. If you have any questions, be sure to email me or Mr. Foley. Have a great day.